Beneath the Atlanta sky, Clara's confession. I never thought I'd be one of those women. The kind who falls for someone significantly younger, who throws caution to the wind after decades of careful planning. Yet here I am, at 48, sitting on my balcony overlooking Piedmont Park, as the Atlanta sunset paints the sky in shades I've used countless times in my design projects, but never fully appreciated until now. Where do I even begin? Maybe with the ending of what I thought would be my forever. Simon and I were Atlanta's power couple for nearly 2 decades. Him with his tech ventures that kept expanding, me with my interior design studio that attracted the city's elite. We lived in a restored Victorian in Inman Park that graced the pages of Southern Living twice. From the outside, we had it all. Until it wasn't. The night everything changed, I'd prepared an anniversary dinner. 20 years together. I'd spent the day at the DeKalb Farmers Market, selecting the perfect heirloom tomatoes for his favorite gazpacho, found a bottle of the Bordeaux we discovered on our honeymoon, and even pulled out my grandmother's china. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 8. By 9, the gazpacho had separated, the soufflé had collapsed, and my phone showed no messages. When Simon finally walked in at 11, he didn't even notice the table setting. The candles burned down to puddles of wax. His eyes were fixed on his phone as he muttered something about server failures and investors pulling out. When I finally broke, throwing a wine glass against our custom-tiled backsplash, he looked at me as if I were a stranger. "What do you want from me, Clara?" he shouted, his voice bouncing off the subway tiles I had hand-selected for their acoustic properties, never imagining they would amplify our arguments. "I'm working myself to death to maintain all this. This house, your studio, the life you've designed for us down to the last throw pillow. And it's never enough for you." Words like daggers followed, accusations about my expensive tastes and impossible standards. And then the one that cut deepest. "Sometimes I think you care more about how our life looks than how it feels." That night, I slept in our guest room, surrounded by the Moroccan-inspired textiles I'd curated after a trip to Marrakech. By morning, I'd made my decision. Within a week, I had moved into the apartment above my studio in Midtown. The divorce was clinical, efficient. Simon was generous financially, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps to expedite the process. Either way, I found myself approaching 50 with a successful business, a tastefully appointed apartment, and a hollowness that no vintage find or carefully selected paint color could fill. For months, I threw myself into work. My studio, Spaces by Clara, took on more projects than ever. I channeled my heartbreak into creating perfect environments for other people, staying late to obsess over fabric swatches and lighting fixtures. My assistant, Marissa, started leaving takeout containers on my desk without a word, knowing I would forget to eat otherwise. It was Marissa who insisted I attend the gallery opening that changed everything. "It's in the same building as that hardware supplier you like," she said, knowing my weakness for hand-forged drawer pulls. "The photographer does these incredible urban landscapes, very architectural, could be inspiration for the West Side project." The West Side project was my biggest yet, a complete renovation of an old factory building into luxury lofts. So I relented, though all I wanted was to crawl into bed with the stack of design magazines I'd been neglecting. Piedmont Gallery was buzzing that April evening, the kind of perfect Atlanta spring night when the dogwoods are in bloom and the air smells like possibility. I wore a silk jumpsuit the color of burnished copper, my first venture away from the neutral palette that had become my uniform during the divorce. My auburn hair was freshly highlighted, falling in the loose curls that had become my signature. I felt presentable. Not alive, not excited, but presentable. The photographs were arresting. Black and white images of Atlanta I barely recognized, though I'd lived here most of my adult life. Shadowy figures crossing rain-slicked streets. The intricate ironwork of historic buildings juxtaposed against glass skyscrapers. A homeless man sleeping beneath a billboard advertising luxury condos. They made me uncomfortable in the best possible way, forcing me to see beyond the carefully curated surfaces I'd spent my career creating. I was standing before a particularly affecting image, an elderly woman sitting alone in a diner, her weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup, when a voice beside me said, "She reminded me of my grandmother." I turned to find myself looking up, a rarity at 5'9", into eyes so deeply brown they appeared black in the gallery lighting. He was tall, lean, with the kind of face that photographers call interesting, rather than handsome, all angles and intensity. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling over the collar of a worn leather jacket that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than style. "Your grandmother?" I asked, finding my voice. "She used to take me to that diner every Sunday after church," he explained, nodding toward the photograph. "Said it was the only place in Atlanta that still made grits the right way." His smile transformed his face from merely interesting to something that made my pulse quicken in a way it hadn't in years. "I'm Ethan. It's my show." "Clara," I responded, extending my hand professionally, as I always did at networking events. Instead of the usual firm handshake, his touch was gentle, lingering just a moment longer than convention dictated. "Your work is unsettling, in the best possible way," he laughed. A surprisingly warm sound from someone who looked so serious. "That might be the nicest compliment I've received all night." We spoke for nearly an hour, moving from photograph to photograph as he explained the stories behind them. He asked questions about my perception of each image that made me realize how long it had been since anyone had genuinely cared about my thoughts, beyond whether a particular fabric would work in a client's space. When the gallery began to empty, he asked if I'd like to continue our conversation over coffee. The responsible thing would have been to decline. I had an early meeting, was still raw from my divorce, and, most significantly, could tell from our conversation that Ethan was much younger than me. But something about the way he saw the world made me curious for more. "There's a place around the corner that makes decent espresso," I suggested, surprising myself. The coffee shop was one of those industrial chic spaces I usually found too trying. Concrete floors, exposed ductwork, Edison bulbs. But that night, sitting across from Ethan on mismatched vintage chairs, it felt authentic rather than affected. "So you make beautiful spaces for a living," he said, warming his hands around a mug of black coffee. No fancy espresso drinks for him. "That explains why you're the only person tonight who asked about the composition, rather than just the subject matter." "Is that a compliment or criticism?" I asked, a hint of defensiveness creeping into my voice. "Neither. An observation." His directness was refreshing after years of Simon's careful politician speak. "Your eye goes to structure first, then story. Mine's the opposite. I see the story, then find the structure to tell it." We debated the relationship between form and function until the barista began pointedly wiping down nearby tables. I was surprised to check my watch and find that nearly 3 hours had passed. "I should go," I said, gathering my purse. "Early client meeting tomorrow. Can I walk you to your car?" he offered. In the soft glow of Atlanta's streetlights, with the spring air carrying the scent of magnolias, we strolled the few blocks to where I'd parked. Our conversation had shifted from art to more personal territory. His childhood in Savannah, my move to Atlanta for college, and never leaving. "How old are you, Ethan?" I finally asked. The question that had been lingering all evening. 29, he answered without hesitation. "Does it matter?" Standing beside my car, I considered his question seriously. "It probably should. But does it to you?" he pressed, stepping close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath, mingled with something earthy and distinctly male. "I'm 48, I said instead of answering directly. "I know." His smile was slow, deliberate. "You mentioned the Wren building renovation when we were talking about historic preservation. That was 20 years ago. You said you were 28 then." I laughed despite myself. "Most men don't listen that carefully." "Ha, I'm not most men." The line should have sounded trite, a pickup artist's standard repertoire. Instead, it felt like a simple statement of fact. "And you didn't answer my question." I opened my car door, creating a barrier between us. "It was nice meeting you, Ethan." "Clara." The way he said my name, with a slight emphasis on the first syllable rather than the second, like most people, made it sound new. "Take my card," In case you want to continue our conversation sometime. I slipped the simple black card into my purse, certain I would never call the number printed in stark white letters. Yet 3 days later, after a particularly frustrating meeting with clients who wanted something modern but also traditional, bold but understated, I found myself reaching for my phone. Our first official date was to the Atlanta Botanical Garden. Ethan brought his camera, naturally, but spent more time looking at me than through his lens. We walked through the orchid display, the colors almost obscenely vibrant after the monochrome palette of my recent life. "Why interior design?" he asked as we sat on a bench beneath a canopy of wisteria. "What drew you to it?" No one had asked me that question in years. Simon had only ever been interested in the business side, profit margins and client lists. "I believe spaces shape us," I answered slowly, searching for words to explain a passion that had always felt instinctive rather than intellectual. The light, the colors, the textures around us affect how we feel, how we interact, what we believe is possible. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Like how this garden makes you feel like whispering, even though there's no rule saying you have to be quiet." Exactly! I felt a surge of excitement at being understood. It's the height of the plants, the way the paths curve so you can't see too far ahead. It creates a natural reverence. "And what spaces shaped you, Clara Richardson?" His question pierced straight to my core. I told him about growing up in a small town outside Chattanooga, in a home where my mother changed the slipcovers with the seasons and rearranged the furniture whenever she was upset with my father. How I learned early that environments were a language, that changing a room could change a mood, fix a problem, create a fresh start. We began seeing each other regularly after that day. Weeknight dinners at hole-in-the-wall places he knew around the city. A Vietnamese spot in Buford Highway where the menus didn't have English translations. A tiny Jamaican place in the West End with the best jerk chicken I've ever tasted. Weekend afternoons wandering neighborhoods I'd driven through but never properly explored. He showed me an Atlanta I hadn't known existed, despite living here for decades. I found myself laughing more than I had in years, wearing jeans and flat shoes, letting my hair air dry into wild curls instead of carefully styling each lock, eating street food without worrying about calories or dry cleaning bills. Ethan photographed everything, not just with his professional camera, but with his phone, capturing candid moments that should have made me self-conscious, but somehow didn't. "You're beautiful when you forget to be perfect," he told me one evening as we sat on the Beltline, eating popsicles from a cart vendor, my silk blouse spotted with drips of blackberry juice. 6 weeks into whatever we were doing, I hesitated to call it dating. That seemed too adolescent a term for what felt more profound. He invited me to his loft in Cabbagetown. I'd driven past the old cotton mill many times, admiring the industrial conversion from an aesthetic perspective, but had never been inside. His space was an assault on my designer sensibilities and utterly magnetic all at once. The bones were magnificent, 20-foot ceilings, massive factory windows, original brick walls. But while I would have paired these industrial elements with clean, contemporary furnishings, Ethan's approach was pure creative chaos. A salvaged church pew served as a dining bench. His coffee table appeared to be an old printing press drawer. Photography equipment mingled with stacks of books, vintage cameras, and bizarre found objects. The walls were a gallery of his work, interspersed with pieces by artist friends. Vibrant graffiti art, next to delicate pencil sketches. "I know it's not your style," he said, watching my expression as I took it all in. "It's perfectly you," I replied, and meant it. That night, we crossed the final boundary between friendship and something more. His hands, artist's hands, with long fingers stained with developer chemicals, moved over my body with reverent curiosity. I had expected to feel self-conscious, aware of the subtle signs of age that no expensive moisturizer could completely erase. Instead, I felt seen in a way I never had before, even in my 20s. "Every line tells a story," he whispered, tracing the slight creases at the corners of my eyes, the softer curve of my waist compared to the Instagram models of his generation. In his bed, an unexpected oasis of quality amid the creative clutter, with linen sheets that surprised me. I rediscovered parts of myself I thought had withered away during the final years with Simon. Under Ethan's attentive gaze, I wasn't Clara Richardson, respected designer and recent divorcee. I was simply a woman, desiring and desired. The morning after, I woke to the smell of good coffee and the sound of soft jazz. Ethan sat by one of the massive windows, photographing the early light as it played across the brick buildings opposite. Wrapped in his sheet, hair a mess, no makeup, I should have felt exposed, vulnerable. Instead, I felt strangely peaceful. "Morning," he said, turning to me with a smile that contained no expectations, no judgment, just genuine pleasure at my presence. "This is insane," I said, voicing the thought that had been circling my mind since our first coffee. "You know that, right? Life's too short for sanity," he replied, setting down his camera and bringing me a mug of coffee, prepared exactly as I liked it. A splash of cream, no sugar. He had noticed, remembered. The weeks that followed blended together in a montage of moments that still make my heart ache with their beauty when I recall them. Ethan showing me how to use his vintage Leica, our heads bent together over the viewfinder. Dancing barefoot in his loft to vinyl records by artists I'd never heard of. Him sitting quietly in the corner of my studio as I worked, sketching me when he thought I wouldn't notice. We argued too. Passionate debates about art versus commerce, form versus function. He challenged my tendency toward perfectionism while I pushed him to meet deadlines and respond to client emails. We were different in ways that should have created insurmountable barriers, but instead built bridges to new perspectives. Of course, the real world couldn't be kept at bay forever. The first time we ran into someone I knew, a client at Ponce City Market, I introduced Ethan as a photographer I'm working with on a project. The hurt that flashed across his face was brief but unmistakable. "Are you ashamed of me?" he asked later as we walked to the parking garage, his voice carefully neutral. "No," I said immediately, then hesitated. "But I'm not sure I'm ready for the questions." The questions, the raised eyebrows, the assumptions that would inevitably follow, that I was having a midlife crisis, that he wanted a mother figure, or financial stability, or connections in the art world, that it couldn't possibly be real. "What are you afraid of, Clara?" He stopped walking, turning to face me in the artificial light of the garage. "That people will talk? Or that they might be right?" I didn't have an answer that didn't sound hollow, even to myself. The incident created the first real fracture in our relationship, a hairline crack that I tried to ignore, but felt widening with each public outing where I kept a careful distance, each dinner with my friends that I attended alone. The breaking point came when I was offered a feature in Atlanta magazine, a spread on my design for a revamped mid-century modern home in Buckhead. The photographer they assigned was a contemporary of mine, George Hastings, who had photographed my work for years. "You should use Ethan," Marissa suggested during our morning meeting. "His eye would bring something fresh to your work." "It's not that kind of shoot," I said dismissively. "It's architectural, not artistic." The words hung in the air between us, the implicit separation of Ethan's work from my professional world painfully clear. Marissa, who had met Ethan several times and adored him, gave me a long look but said nothing more. That evening, I mentioned the upcoming shoot to Ethan over dinner at my apartment. He listened quietly, twirling pasta around his fork with deliberate focus. "I'm happy for you," he said finally. "It's a great opportunity." "Thank you," I replied, relieved that he understood. "But I think we need to talk about what's really happening here." He set down his fork, meeting my eyes across the table I had set with the Limoges china I rarely used. "You've built these separate compartments for your life, your work, your friends. And then there's us, existing only in private, like something shameful." "That's not fair," I protested. "We go out all the time. To places where you won't run into anyone you know," he countered. "Hidden gems, remember? That's how you described that Ethiopian place last week." He was right, and we both knew it. I had been carefully curating our relationship just as I curated everything else in my life, keeping Ethan in a beautiful box separate from the rest of my world. I'm not asking to be paraded around like some trophy," he continued, his voice softening. But I need to know that you're not just experimenting with me, Clara. That I'm not just some exciting detour before you return to the life everyone expects you to lead. Tears burned behind my eyes. What do you want from me? Integration, he said simply. I want to be part of your whole life, not just the secret parts. And I want you to be part of mine. The next day, he left for a 2-week assignment in New Orleans. We parted with tense smiles and promises to talk when he returned. But as the days passed with only brief text exchanges, I felt his absence like a physical ache. My apartment, once my sanctuary, felt sterile and empty. I found myself sleeping in one of his t-shirts he had left behind, the faint scent of his sandalwood soap a poor substitute for his presence. The photo shoot for Atlanta magazine went flawlessly. George captured my designs exactly as I would have presented them: impeccable, sophisticated, controlled. Looking at the preliminary shots on his camera, I felt a strange disconnect. The spaces were beautiful, certainly, but seeing them through George's conventional lens made me realize how much my aesthetic had evolved through my time with Ethan. Where once I had strived for perfection, I now saw value in thoughtful imperfection. The patina of age, the evidence of human touch, the story behind an object rather than just its visual appeal. On the final evening before Ethan's return, I found myself driving aimlessly through Atlanta, eventually parking near Piedmont Park. As the sun set over the city skyline, I walked to the spot where Ethan had first photographed me months earlier. Laughing as I tried to keep my balance on the uneven path in heels, never meant for park strolls. Standing there, watching families pack up picnic blankets and couples walking hand in hand, I finally understood what I had been so afraid of. Not judgment from others, but the terrifying vulnerability of allowing myself to love completely, without reservation or control. At 48, I had built a life defined by aesthetic harmony and careful boundaries. Ethan had crashed through those boundaries, bringing messy, beautiful chaos. Loving him meant accepting that life couldn't be perfectly arranged, like a room in a magazine spread. It had to be lived, with all its unpredictable wonder and occasional disarray. When his key turned in my apartment door the next evening, he had given him a key weeks earlier, another significant step I had tried to downplay. I was waiting with a bottle of wine and a decision. "I missed you," he said, dropping his battered canvas duffel bag by the door. "I need to show you something," I replied, taking his hand and leading him into what had been my home office. The room had been transformed in his absence. My sleek desk had been replaced by a rustic work table. The walls, once a safe shade of grage, were now painted a deep, rich blue that brought to mind the twilight sky. Most significantly, the built-in shelves that had displayed design books and carefully chosen objects now held photographic equipment, prints in various stages of development, and a vintage enlarger I had tracked down through an art school connection. "What is this?" he asked, turning slowly to take in the transformation. "Your dark room," I said, my heart racing. "If you want it. And this." I handed him an envelope containing the confirmation email. "Is your gallery showing next month at Piedmont? I spoke to Miranda. She's been wanting to feature your New Orleans work." His expression was unreadable as he scanned the email. "You did this while I was gone?" I nodded, suddenly uncertain. Was it too presumptuous? "No," he said slowly. "It's amazing, but why?" Taking a deep breath, I gave him the truth he deserved. "Because I love you, Ethan. Not as an escape or an experiment or a separate piece of my life. I love all of you, and I want all of us. The messy, complicated, probably going to raise eyebrows us." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "Say it again." "I love you," I repeated, the words feeling both terrifying and completely right. "Again," he insisted, pulling me close. "I love you," I laughed against his lips. "Now stop being smug about it." His kiss was a promise, and for the first time in my carefully designed life, I embraced the beautiful uncertainty of a future I couldn't predict or control. 6 months later, Ethan moved in permanently. My midtown apartment underwent a gradual transformation as his belongings mingled with mine. Vintage cameras displayed alongside my art glass collection, his documentary photography books, sharing shelves with my design references. We converted the second bedroom into a proper studio where he could work when not traveling for assignments. The Atlanta design community raised collective eyebrows, as expected. There were whispers about midlife crises and trophy boyfriends, but something unexpected happened as well. My work began attracting a different clientele, younger, more adventurous patrons who appreciated the evolution in my aesthetic. The spaces I designed became less perfectly curated, more authentically lived in. Spaces by Clara developed a reputation for interiors that told stories rather than simply showcasing wealth or following trends. Ethan's career flourished too. His gallery show sold out opening night, with 3 pieces purchased by the High Museum for their permanent collection. He began receiving commissions for editorial work in national publications, his distinctive eye bringing depth to everything from fashion spreads to architectural features. We still argue about aesthetics, about scheduling, about whose turn it is to empty the dishwasher. He still leaves coffee cups on every surface and forgets to respond to emails. I still wake at 5 a.m. to reorganize the refrigerator when I'm stressed. But beneath these surface frictions lies a fundamental harmony I never experienced with Simon, despite our more obvious compatibility on paper. Last week, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset paint the Atlanta skyline in shades of amber and rose, Ethan asked if I had any regrets. About us? I clarified. About any of it, he said. The divorce. Taking a chance on someone so different. Opening yourself up to scrutiny. I considered his question seriously, as I've learned he always deserves. No, I finally answered. I spent too many years designing spaces for other people to live their best lives while forgetting to live my own. You taught me that beauty isn't found in perfection, it's found in authenticity. He took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, his stained with dark room chemicals, mine with the paint samples I'd been testing for a new project. Different, complementary, connected. That's the thing about love that arrives unexpectedly, in a package you never thought to look for. It doesn't erase your past or solve all your problems. It simply opens your eyes to possibilities you had stopped imagining. At 48, I thought I knew exactly who I was and what my life would be. At 49, I wake up each day next to a man 19 years my junior who teaches me something new about myself, about art, about love. And that, my friend, is the most beautiful design of all.